Hello to all our listeners and viewers. This is our seventh in a series of interviews with experts in the field of climate change and migration in Cyprus. Our aim is to inform as many young people of the interconnections between climate change and migration. These podcasts are created in the context of the project End Climate Change, Start Climate Off Change by the University of Nicosia Research Foundation. Today's invited speaker is Mr. Charalambos Theopemptou, head of the Green Party in Cyprus and president of the Parliamentary Committee for the Environment. Charalambos, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
It's the honor is ours, of course. So thank you for coming. We don't really, Charalambos doesn't really need an introduction, but I think it's important to say a few things about Charalambos' background. He was born in Aglanja, and he studied electrical engineering at City University of London. In 1986, he became a lecturer at ADI, the Higher Technological Institute in Cyprus, and in 2013, he was a lecturer at the Cyprus University of Technology in Limassol. Charalambos has been part of the Green Party for many years, and he has two sons and very active with all kinds of things that have to do with climate change. So really, it's an honor having you here today.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Charalambos, I think it's important we start with Cyprus and we look at the issues that are occurring here on the island regarding climate change. Do you think things are being implemented properly with regards to climate change? I know recently you were in the parliament and you spoke about human rights and climate change, about the things we often do not know when it comes to our own rights with these issues. What are your thoughts on this?
We need to explain to people there are two very important things one should be aware with regards to climate change. One is, what is it that we need to do to delay climate change and manage to get control of our lives and control the climate change, the changes of climate as much as we can. And the most important thing for Cyprus is, once I know and I have all the science behind it, for years now, I know what the conditions will be in Cyprus. We know about the changes in temperature. We know about the changes in the rainfall and all the repercussions of all this. What do we need to do? What is it that we need to do in order to prepare the country and the people in order to face what's coming with climate change? Because no matter what we do with regards to reducing emissions, the changes are on their way. It takes years for any changes that we do in terms of reducing emissions for this to appear in the climate change. So we know for sure what's coming, and we need to prepare the country. This, for me, in a small country like Cyprus, is very important because we are in one of the worst places on the planet with regards to climate change. We are going to see temperature increases and we are going to see rainfall reduction. So therefore, it's very important to get ready for that.
Wouldn't it be fair to say that we already are witnessing a lot of these droughts, for example? And we were talking the other day on another podcast episode about how 40 degrees plus used to be the exception. Now, just by looking at this summer, it seems like every day we had 40 plus weather.
A lot of scientists say that one of the worst things about climate change is that it happens not very fast, a little bit slowly. So you get people that are born in a country and they think this is the climate. And it's not like that. And one of the most successful projects I did with my students at the Cyprus University of Technology was I asked them to prepare a video interviewing grandparents mostly and parents on how the weather was when they were kids. And they were shocked about with the descriptions that they got on film. From the amount of rainfall, the snow, the rivers that were running down from Trudeau's, the snow that melted in late April and even May, the amount of snow that we had on Trudeau's, meters of snow. So we have a generation that think this is the weather in Cyprus, and it's not. You're absolutely right. It wasn't like this. I remember it was very rare to get over 40 degrees, and everybody was saying, oh, it went over 40 degrees. Nowadays, it's so common to get over 40 degrees. And when I was a kid, we used to go back to school in September, and it was getting cold, and we had the first rains, and the farmers went out and they were sowing the fields and all the activity, the farming activity that happened. Now, when is it that we get the first rain? We get it late November. Mm. We get it in November. We lost September altogether, or in October. And if you look back, even 10 or 15 years ago, what scientists were telling us about the changes in the weather in Cyprus, you will see that they kept talking about extending summer periods. And this is what is happening. They always said that we will get a 2-month increase in the summer period, or let me just rephrase it, in the period that we don't have rains. So imagine a bush in the countryside. A bush will get its, or a tree, it will get their last rain when? May, June, and the next time that they get water is late November. So they stay, you have July, August, September, October, November. They stay this long without any rain. This is the reason why everybody is talking about slowly happening of desertification.
Yeah.
Especially in the plains.
Yeah.
And also, if you talk to people in the forestry department, they will tell you that we are losing specific types of trees in the plains. And you only find them nowadays higher up in Trudeau's. So the changes are here and they are happening. They are happening too slowly, perhaps, for people to notice, but they are happening.
The analogy is like we are frogs boiling with the water
yes.
rather than to place us in the boiling water and jump out. So it makes sense, therefore, that Cyprus and the Mediterranean is a hotspot. Of course, we are in that region of being a hotspot. So the COP26 summit that just took place, there was not a lot of hope at the end of that, although some countries and some organizations maybe are framing it a little bit differently. It seems to be the case that it was a failure, so to speak. And
to me, it was a failure.
It was a failure.
Yeah.
It seems very difficult that we're going to meet that 1.5 degrees that we need. So therefore, what can we do about it? I think the big question is, because a lot of younger audiences will be listening to us here on this podcast, what can they do about it? And maybe as an extension to that question, do older generations also need to do something? Should they be doing something different? How would you what kind of advice would you give to different cohorts of the population?
Okay. First of all, I need to agree with you that, and I think most people will agree, that it was a failure. I mean, we expected a lot more out of COP26. Now, there is one thing that they agreed, and that is reducing methane emissions. Reducing methane emissions is nothing new in Europe. Within the European Union, we had an obligation that the deadline of implementing it was in 2016. In 2016, all the biodegradable waste that we produced on the island, we had the responsibility to handle it and collect it separately and avoid throwing it in the rubbish dumps. Because when you bury, for instance, food remains in a rubbish dump, automatically when that begins to rot, you get methane emissions coming out. And this is the reason why when you get a fire in a rubbish dump, it never stops. It's so difficult to put it out. So this is something that we should be doing. And now we have in the Parliamentary Committee for the Environment the new regulation that will force everybody, all households, to have a bin outside. And in that bin, everybody will put the food remains, food waste, whatever is biodegradable, put it in that bin that will be separately collected and processed. Now, you will also see some anger coming out of environmental groups. And the anger is that, is it the people that they need to change? The answer is of course, but the big corporations, the big guys that are responsible for this, the governments, what are they going to do about it? It's not just me saving water and doing this and that. What do the big corporations do about it? What does the government do about it? It's them that we should focus on. We, of course, teach people how to behave correctly, but we should not let governments and big corporations out of the limelight. We need to see them, to check them. What do they do? What are their measures? What is the government plan to do this? And this is, to me, very important, because if you look at the emissions, the greenhouse emissions in Cyprus with regards to climate change, you'll see public transport. Public transport, we say to people it's best to walk and it's best to cycle and take the bus. Where do they expect me to walk? It's so dangerous to cycle in Cyprus, and there is no real public transport. So it's not me that is at fault that I use my car. It's the government's fault. It's the government that didn't provide me with public transport and the means to go to work and travel on a public bus, for instance. So we should focus on them. And the other thing is, the next source of emission is public transport, and the next one is housing. Mm-hmm. When you look at the emissions due to housing, and you look back, and you'll find that we are one of the last countries in Europe that introduced minimum specifications for the energy performance of houses, of buildings. I think a study showed that we are around 80 to 90% of building stock on the island, on the buildings, either private homes of big corporation buildings or multi-story flat houses. They have nothing with regards to energy performance. They didn't use insulation, not the houses, nothing. So we have a lot of work to go back and prepare this housing. So government is responsible here for providing the right funding and the right projects to help people to strengthen the energy performance of the houses. Do insulation, incentives, change the windows, roof insulation, and do everything to prepare the homes for that. And the last source of emissions is electricity production. Okay, electricity production in Cyprus is now produced using heavy oil. So what did government do? We had the obligation to do 13% of renewables, produce electricity using 13%. Most of the countries in Europe, they exceeded that responsibility. We were not doing anything. You won't see government promoting, for instance, photovoltaics on houses, etc., or even on public buildings. They were not doing anything. And now we are going to pay a penalty because with the new Fit for 55 EU program, the target will be 40% in 2030. In 2030, we should have 40%. Other countries are much higher than us, and it's much easier for them to get to 40%. We are at the bottom. We are at 13%. So from 13% to go to 40% in 9 years, I don't see how we are going to get to that. So that worries me. It worries me a lot.
We had Mr. Babadakis the other day here, who was telling us also about the issues of the penalties that Cyprus is paying, and the numbers he shared with us are quite alarming, to the point that maybe all those penalties we paid, if they had been invested in, for example, solar farms, we could have been almost completely independent of all of these older technologies.
Just to remind people, EU set a certain limit of emissions to the electricity authority. At the beginning, it was a 10-year plan, actually a shorter plan. But we started with a very low penalty, and then the penalty says increases, the free allowances were reduced. And we reached to a point where we started 10 years ago paying around €1 million just for the right to emit gases. And we ended up in 2020 paying €100 million just to get the right to emit climate change gases. 2020 was the end. So now everybody that needs to buy right to emit, they go to a trading system. And you know very well that is the age-old law of economics, supply and demand. You have a little supply and there is a very high demand. So in 2020, it was around €100 million. Now everybody wants to buy emission rights, and it's expected to be 150 to 200 million euros that will pay just for the right to emit. And that is only for the electricity authority. And that, with 100 million euro, around 30% of the electricity bill it's the money that goes for the emissions. Now, is it only electricity authority? No. It's also government. And not many people know this. Government had the obligation to have 10% of energy used in transport be from renewables. 10% of the energy used in transport. We got only 5% out of that, around. So what happens with the rest? So now government has to buy now emission rights. And the emission rights that government will buy are more than 40 to 50 million euros per year. So where is government going to get this money? They will actually put it on the price of petrol. So price of petrol will have an increase in the price of petrol 2 times. One for the emissions rights of government failure to get 10% renewables in transport. And the other one will come because within the Fit for 55 EU package for climate change, they are going to stop charging taxes on fuel depending on the energy content, but they will tax energy fuel depending on the amount of emissions per fuel. So the end result will be a higher price for fuel.
Ultimately paid by the Cypriot citizen, the taxpayer.
Exactly.
It seems to me that corporations have, one way or another, started to set things in motion with trying to make some changes. I see some of the larger corporations creating sustainability departments. A lot of corporate social responsibility has increased, and at least from the very basic minimum requirements, they are changing their own energy consumptions, for example. So things are changing when it comes to corporations on that level, and they do see the pressure that comes from the consumer. So as consumers, it seems we are applying the right kind of pressure. Now, this particular podcast series has been and is, of course, ideologically neutral. It doesn't try to advocate any particular position, but it does seem to me that with all of the models which are out there, with everything that we see around us concerning climate change, as citizens, okay, the consumer role, we have done a good job. But as citizens, why are we not applying the right kind of pressure to our governments? This has nothing to do with any political party, again, but it seems to me like the priority should be on finding the party which has the correct policies when it comes to saving our planet. And that doesn't seem to be the case when it comes to how we vote. This should be, by the way, just to again say one more time to state that this should be something that goes out to all government parties. This isn't, I know that you are representing the Green Party, and of course it's in your remit to do so, but this goes for all, government officials.
I think if you ask, at least verbally, a lot of the parties, political parties will say, of course, we need to prepare for the coming changes. Of course, we want to care about the environment, but it's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to actually do something about it. But we must also remember that we are living in a country that people pressure was never evident in the sense that it will affect policies. I think the best example is what happened with the passport issues. We were handing out passports. We saw the film that was prepared by Al Jazeera. We saw our the president of the parliament, a member of parliament. We saw the amounts of passports that were giving out. What government was doing, we know, and we still see the abandoned towers in Limassol and everywhere. We built everywhere. And the demos only lasted 1 or 2 days. And that's it. Everybody went back home. They forgot everything about it. When time came to vote, they kept voting like they did before. It's when people say in Cyprus we have a very short memory, it's true. And the media didn't do their bit on that. It's if you look back at the way the elections were done, we didn't have the debates that we had before. We didn't have the debates on what is a debate on education, a debate on the environment, a debate on the economy, a debate on social issues, housing, the health. These debates that we used to have before in elections, we didn't have them. We used to be called to go to discussions, and it was random questions. And most of them, I felt that they were trying to find out the weaknesses of each party and just poke them on that. It wasn't a debate on what is this party's policy on housing, what is it on education, creating jobs, the economy, the environment, all these things. We didn't have these discussions.
There seems to be, there seems to be a lack of climate literacy more generally. The way we communicate, my background, of course, I am a communications practitioner, and I see and I identify knowledge gaps when it comes to these issues anyway. So there might be, for example, political parties who are doing good things, who are trying to make the changes, and not just to bundle everything in parties, but individuals who are more concerned about these things, but are not finding the right channels. For example, there have been now some interesting incentives when it comes to changing your car to an electric car. And I am witnessing all over social media the different advertising that the car manufacturers are now communicating and advertising. but very few of them have actual calls to action to take you to the place to show you how you can proceed with these issues. This is just an example. I know it's the first steps. Could there be more that's done in terms of how we communicate to really give emphasis on these issues, to tell the layperson that this is how you can do this, this is how you should be doing this, this is how you can actually change your own carbon footprint, and etc.?
You're absolutely right with what you say, but I am an avid environmentalist. I am involved in the environment from early 1990s. Would I buy an electric car? If you sit down and consider, should I buy an electric car? Then there are a few things that pop up. Question number one, can I afford it? Okay. So government says, okay, if you cannot afford it, I will give you a refund on that. Still, it's the amount of money that I need to put in, it's a little bit expensive. Second thing, let's say I buy an electric car. Will I be able to charge it? Will I find myself in the middle of nowhere with no charging point? And the answer is, we have a problem. And we have a huge problem. It's not just a small problem with charging points. In 2016, 5 years ago, we had to submit to the European Union the plan on alternative fuels. And within the plan, we were requested to provide to EU what were our plans for charging points, for instance. And what government at the time decided to do was just to put a charging point in every motorway, one charging point in every motorway. That was the government policy. And not only it was inadequate, not only it was ridiculous what they proposed, they didn't even do it. They proposed to EU, we are going to put a charging point in every motorway, and we are in 2021 and they haven't done it yet. They didn't do anything. If you have an electric car, you get the opportunity to charge it at the electricity authority charging points. Okay, I accept that if I charge my car, I will pay for the electricity. Okay, but why do they charge me a fee whether I use the charging points or not? This is ridiculous. Do you want to promote electric mobility, which is the right term, or not? And the other thing, electric mobility is not only about using electric cars. There are electric bicycles that are selling like hotcakes abroad. And electric bikes in general, not just bicycles.
Yeah.
Because if you say cars are not allowed to go to this area of the city, or if you have low emission zones, or if you have bike lanes, and if you have all the infrastructure, so that I find it very difficult to go with a car, but I'm not a cycling type, the next best solution is to buy an electric bike. Very low cost, it drives you everywhere, it's easy, and it's very popular abroad for this reason. And you take the battery, you take it in your home, you charge it during the night, and you're off the next day. So this, we didn't pay any attention to that. They didn't do the cycle lanes. They didn't put the charging points. They didn't prevent cars from getting into the cities. They didn't have public transport. They left everything too late. And what you are seeing now is the Resilience and Recovery Fund that the EU has provided us with. It's around €1 billion, out of which almost 500 million we had to do something green. And we are doing it not because government was planning this and wanted to do it for so many years now. It's because they were forced to do it. They were not doing anything before. Now they are forced to do it, and they do it. Thank God. At least let's do something.
Yeah.
But this is what angers people. And then you look at if I had this infrastructure, it would be easy for me to come out and say to people, please you don't need to take the car, take the bicycle. We don't have the infrastructure for people to tell them this. I cannot come out to people and say, take the bus. What bus? I mean, the routes, how often do they get through? They are very difficult to use. I cannot go to people and say, it's better to walk. It's best for your health. Walk where? I mean, this is ridiculous. You know that they don't put zebra crossings so that they won't prevent the cars from going at the right speed because it will interrupt traffic. You go to any major city in the world, you see zebra crossings all over the center of the cities. Here we don't, so that we don't interrupt the traffic. I mean, we are at that level still.
I understand a lot of money has gone into research and development when it comes to these technologies, and a lot of organizations need to recoup that money. For example, that's why a lot of electric cars are so expensive. I understand that. And let's hope that these foundations, because they're foundational basic things that need to be done in terms of infrastructure, are gradually going to be done. And it goes back to, finding the right people to implement the right policies. I think that's very important. So if we could take the discussion a bit outside of our borders now, the Green Deal. What do you think of the Green Deal? Is it too ambitious? Is it something that you think the EU, because the EU has taken on a leadership role in climate change, is it something which can be met?
It's everybody admits that it's very ambitious. I am glad that it's now the number one EU priority because EU was always interested in the environment. We had other priorities before. Now environment is the number one priority. The difficulty with the Green Deal is the transition. So if you look at countries like us, and there are worse countries than us, there are countries that produce electricity using coal. So what will happen to them? How will they go from using coal to using renewables?
Germany, I think, is a very important case in point.
Germany, if you look at Poland, Hungary, these countries, they have their own resources, and they rely on these fossil fuels. So we need to have the support for the transition. There is a policy on that. This is the fund that is known as the Just Transition Fund. But how you implement it and how you make sure that you don't have people that lose their jobs, you don't bring economic hardship because you are trying to save the environment. You want to do both. So this is the major difficulty, if you like. Like, for instance, here, if I say we need to be using renewables, use electric cars, use electric mobility of all sorts, automatically, if I say use public transport, in Cyprus, you reduce the amount of fossil fuels. So will the guy that sells petrol, has a petrol station, what will happen to them? What will happen to the guys that sell petrol for central heatings if I insulate my house? So you need to be doing these changes, but you also need to be doing what's needed to support the people that they will face problems in their lives because of these changes. And it's the transition that is scary. It's not, we know exactly how to do what we want to do. The point is, what are you going to do with all these people? It's not a big issue in Cyprus, but it's a huge issue abroad. And there are countries that actually threaten that will get out of EU if we keep pushing what we are pushing now for Green Deal.
Cyprus seems to be doing well in terms of its research funding. I think just the other day it was announced that we are first in Europe in absorbing EU funding. And if the EU now is changing all of its research priorities towards cleaner climate change, a cleaner environment, there could be an interesting convergence there with Cyprus making an interesting shift if a lot of the research now is going towards climate issues. Look at us here today. I mean, our own project is based on this, for example.
Yeah. I think the opportunity that we had actually for many years now in Cyprus is that we have the opportunity to become the green country, the greenest country in Europe. We have the opportunity to become somebody that everybody will be looking up to. We have the people, we have the know-how, we have the resources, we have everything to make this island the greenest country in Europe. And this is what is frustrating with this. We have the sun, we have the science, we have all the resources that we need. What we are missing is policies, governments, people that actually need to be doing this. And I believe in our people. I saw them doing wonders. So we can do this. And let me just give you an example why I'm talking about this. You know that we were one of the top countries in the world with regards to telecommunications. Because we are a small country, we did the changes, we had extremely good engineers, we had the technicians, we had the know-how, and we were then, I think, the number 3 country in the world with regards to telecommunications. We've done it before. We can do wonders again. But it's political will that is missing.
Yeah. One of the important questions I have been asking our guests here on this series has to do with the various models which are out there regarding climate refugees and people who might have to move from inhabitable lands to other places. And the main question is, where will they move to? Because some of the numbers that I have been reading from the different research studies that I've looked at are quite alarming. If we thought political refugees were a problem for Europe and generally for the world, those numbers are quite small compared to the figures that we are looking at from particularly Northern African countries.
Yeah.
When we see so much resistance to this in the EU, of course, and in other countries, in North America, in Australia, it's not just our region here, but there is resistance, which in fact I would argue is also increasing populism and political polarization. It's causing issues around the world, even a threat to democracy too. So these figures are quite serious. Where will they go?
This is one of the scariest issues in climate change. We are talking about hundreds of millions of climate change refugees. And the reason why they will move to another country is because they cannot live off their land because of climate changes, reduced rainfall, and increased temperatures. So it's very scary. And from the reports that I was reading, it appears that between the years of 2030 and 2040, we will get a very noticeable movement of refugees because the population on the planet keeps increasing. Due to climate changes, we cannot produce the amount of food that we used to have before. And Therefore, these people will be trying to move to places to find something to eat and to live off. And this is one of the major reasons why the United Nations are making the reduction of food waste one of their major campaigns these years. And it's something that we should be looking at as well. And let me tell you something, just to for people to understand this. India is the third largest food producer in the world. And in India, they throw away around 50% of the food produced. Why? Because they don't have, for instance, means to keep it, for instance, like a fridge. And therefore, you see all these things, we need to look at them very, very carefully now, because we are heading for a disaster. Everybody knows it. And we feel that not much is done. And this is the reason why, and it was a movie like that. And I mean, for me, it stayed in my mind. And it said that in the old days, they were doing damage and they didn't know what they were doing. Nowadays, we know what we are doing and we keep doing it. And this is the reason why future generations, they will call this age, this period of time, as the age of stupid. Because we are the stupid ones. We know what is happening and we keep doing. We know that the planet is being destroyed, is heading for disaster, and we are not changing our habits. This is the reason why we will be known as the age of stupid.
In closing, is there something that I have not asked you? Is there a particular message that you would like to share with our audience? And remember, just as a reminder, it is a younger audience, I think, that we are talking to. So,
to me, it's, first of all, make sure that we pressure the right people to do things. Change your habits, of course, but put pressure on companies, put pressure on governments, on politicians to change their ways. We know what needs to be done. The science is there. It's been advising us for years now. We know what to do. The point is we need to do it. And we need to do it now and not in 10 or 20 times. We don't have any more time. Time has run out. So it's urgent. This is why people are not talking about climate change anymore, and we are talking about climate crisis.
This has been a podcast interview with Charalambos Theopemptou. Charalambe, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
The aim of the project, End Climate Change, Start Climate of Change, is to raise awareness of young EU citizens in the critical understanding of migration caused by climate change, as it is considered one of the biggest challenges in the world. Through the implementation of the project, the Research Foundation of the University of Nicosia aims to inform the young citizens of Cyprus about the relationship between the economic system in which we live, our way of life, and the human impact on climate change in the world south. The project is funded by the European Commission under the program Development, Education and Awareness Raising, DEAR, of the European Union. For more information, you can go to climateofchange.info/Cyprus. My name is Nicoli, and thank you so much for your time.